Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of LogisticsSales.com, where today we'll be discussing your negotiables and non-negotiables. So stick around and we'll get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host, Dean, and with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Damon and Gail. Today, we're going to be talking about your negotiables and non-negotiables and understanding those and how they can help make or break a deal. So we're going to jump right into it today with Gail. Why don't you tell us, how do you determine what those are?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dean. So before we get started, I wanted to kind of go over a little bit about what is a negotiable and a non-negotiable when it comes to your ideal client and creating your client profile. So a negotiable are basically an aspect of your interactions with your customer and your prospect that have room for interpretation. So you can kind of change them or adapt to them. You can negotiate on them. They're things that can be adapted based off of the service agreement, the relationship that you're building. A non-negotiable is based off of core principles and values that are non-waverable. So they're consistent, they don't change. Things like maintaining integrity and honesty, stuff like that is what's important to you and that you have to hold by regardless of the opportunity.
I think this is important, especially after going over the client profile last episode. But really getting into negotiables and non-negotiables, what it really gets down to is how do you want to feel when you're doing the work that you do? And I think that becomes important is knowing, okay, well, if I'm working with clients, what type of clients do I want to work with? And what am I okay with and what am I not okay with? Is another way to kind of term this instead of getting too fancy with it. And I always like to break it down to like that simple context, like what does it really mean for you? And that's essentially it, is how do I want to feel when I'm doing the work that I'm doing, especially if I'm going to do this on a day-to-day basis, the longevity of it, when we're thinking long-term, you'd rather be in situations that you like versus situations that you don't like. And if it's aligned with who you are, then you're going to enjoy it, you're going to have a great time. But if you don't really take the time to figure out your negotiables and non-negotiables, you may go into a situation where in the long term you may not be happy on what you're doing because you just didn't set it up properly.
Yeah, and as we go through this too, because we're piggybacking off of understanding your ideal client, I think we're also going to get into, are you capable of doing the work that the client wants done?
Yeah. I think like a lot of the times, there is no customer that's going to fit perfectly with absolutely every aspect of who you are and the services you provide. But there's always room to kind of wiggle on certain aspects of that relationship and that partnership. The real question that we're going to be digging into today is, what is that red line? What is that line where you will not cross over? Once you can define what that line is, then you can start figuring out where customers align on that spectrum.
So as we start to get into all of this with Gail, she's going to start off with her negotiables. If you can go into the worksheet and follow along, hopefully you'll gain invaluable information. And if any questions come up, remember, we're always here and really want to hear from you and help you in every single way that we can. So back to Gail.
Yeah. So we've kind of broken down your negotiables and non-negotiables into two distinct sections. First off is your personal assessment, and then next is going to be your business relationship assessment. So as we go through the personal assessment, this is more specific to you, to your individual beliefs, the way that you want to conduct your business, and the way that you want to work. So the first question is hours. Are you willing to work with a customer that requires additional time commitments? This is different for everybody. Some people are willing to invest, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Some people really want to kind of manage that, work-home life balance. And, some are very clear, like I work 8 to 4:30 or whatever your times are. So you have to kind of figure out, are you willing to compromise on that? Is that something that you're firm with, or are you going to make adjustments for it?
I think this is more figuring out, do I want to make it a part-time gig or do I want to make it a full-time gig? What am I doing here? You're getting clarity just on yourself. So then when you're making your roadmap on what you want to accomplish, at least okay, well, if I'm available during these hours, I can do it for this amount of time, and these are the type of clients I'm going to have to go after.
And I think Damon puts out a really great point there. A lot of times, you really have to assess what your time commitment is going to be, which kind of leads into the second question here as well, which is about your time allotment. Are you willing to commit certain dedicated blocks to doing the things that are going to be crucial for your success? sometimes people want to do this as a part-time gig. It becomes a lot more challenging when you are doing it on reduced hours. People who are generally want to really go in and jump into the sales aspect, they're going to have to spend a lot of dedicated time doing sales. And that means dedicating specific blocks for prospecting, dedicating specific times for follow-ups, for doing emails, for doing networking. So are you willing to commit those time blocks?
Yeah, I think it's important, just again, for people to understand the mindset. If I'm going to undertake one of these type of positions, what does that require of me? And do I have the capability and capacity to be able to do that and deliver on it?
And I think when you first start out, it's always a lot more involved when you get things started, especially when you're working with that specific client. And then once you understand their wants and needs, and you know what your negotiables and non-negotiables are, you're going to develop a certain pattern with that customer. And as you go through it, things will start to kind of systematically run themselves. So knowing going into it that you're going to have to put forth a lot of effort in the beginning to especially get this relationship off the ground is a good concept to have in the back of your mind as you're going through this process.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Dean. And then the third one is workplace. Do you have a place, whether it's in an office or if you're working from home, do you have the right type of setup in order to dedicate proper time without distractions to really focus on doing your sales and getting the work in? We've talked about time commitments here before, and it is so important to be able to just sit down and get the work done. And sometimes it gets difficult or challenging if you're, always faced with constant distractions. So really assess, where are you with your current situation? Do you have the right things in place? Is there maybe things that you need to add to? And are there things that you're willing to compromise on? Some people are okay working on a beach off their cell phones, and some people need a dedicated office with no outside distractions.
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about is the type of clients, again, you're going after. Do they require signed documents? Do they require you to be in a professional setting? Do you require additional people to help you along with what you're doing? What hours are you available? So again, does your environment provide for that safe and work environment that you need to be successful?
Like if you're going after large corporate accounts, do you think that there's going to be a time when they say, hey, let's hop on a Zoom call? Or if that's the case, are you in a proper environment to take a really, important phone call where they're going to be able to see you and they're going to be able to see your surroundings? Like even something as simple as having like a nice clean space that portrays professionalism is very important. All right, now as we head into number 4 is work-life balance. I mean, this one's pretty self-explanatory, but are you willing to waver or make exceptions or adjustments to the way that you have balanced your work and your home life? Sometimes when you're building off your sales business, there needs to be sacrifice, and you need to be able to take away maybe time from your family in order to really dedicate, working on your prospects for a little while. But is that something that you're willing to compromise on? Those are questions that you really need to be able to ask yourself.
And it goes back to our last episode about understanding your ideal client, because some of those needs sometimes will be during non-traditional hours. So that's one of the things you look at, whether this is a negotiable or not. Am I going to be available to respond to their needs after hours? Or do I have somebody in place that I can designate? That's really important to have going in.
And so this is all for the main kind of idea of setting up your client profile, because there are some customers that they are also going to work 8 to 4 and they don't work on the weekends. So maybe if you don't want to work on the weekends, those are the type of customers that you want to be going after. But then if there are larger companies who require 24-hour service, maybe that's something that you need to look at and say, okay, is this something I'm willing to put forward? A really good example are some of those large corporate accounts. When you're moving their shipments, they require updates every 2 hours. So either you have to have somebody in place, like an operational employee in place, to make sure those updates are going out, or maybe at the beginning that has to be you. So those are types of questions you need to be asking and say, am I willing to sacrifice my time in order to make these accounts? And that leads me right into point number 5, which is quality of service. Are you really willing to put in the work to maintaining a high quality of service? Because this is definitely going to reflect on you as an individual, your company that you're working for, and your brand, whether it's a personal brand or like a company brand. The amount of quality work that you produce is really going to reflect on that. And a lot of times that does require additional commitments. So where are you with that?
And I think also it's with not just the quality work, but the type of work. We've seen so many times with some of our sales reps where they want to get in and get the work. And if there's a certain selling proposition, a unique selling proposition in our field, which, obviously quality service is important, but it has to be a service that matches your selling proposition. With transportation, if you're a full truckload provider and you come across a client that is not necessarily ideal because they're looking for less than truckload services, and you just want to provide the service and go after them, but it really needs, you need to define your negotiables and non-negotiables to make sure they fit within your specific expertise, really, because you don't want to say, yeah, I want to do this, knowing that you're just going to fail probably, because that's not what you're specialized in. So you have to go in with a very open mind and a clear understanding of what's at stake, because if you provide the service and the quality of service is not there, then you'll lose that relationship. And also, just as you provide great service, and that's some of your best advertising out there with word of mouth, if you provide poor service, you don't want that reputation to get out there.
And Dean, that goes right into point number 6, service and the margin that we have per shipment, or the commission that we're trying to earn. We need some wiggle room within that product or service that we're offering, because the after service and the quality of service is all dependent on the price that we're able to charge the client. And if you don't leave that room in there, and let's say sometimes even the market fluctuates, and what we've seen with supply chain issues or shortages of or strikes that have happened, one thing that we notice is that commodity prices can jump up and down, and what that does is it changes the price, and the last thing you want to do is start changing price on your customer and client. So if you leave that margin of error in there, or you leave that margin and make sure that, okay, if something were to happen and I couldn't deliver that service myself, I can at least make sure that the client is taken care of. You want to make sure that some of these items you're really paying close attention to, and not really pricing yourself out of the market where you can't deliver on what you promise.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this, as you can see, these are all personal assessments. And after the personal assessments, you can get into the business relationship assessments. And a really important one off the top is core values. You want to make sure when you're doing your business relationship assessment that the values that of this potential client align with your own, because if they don't, there's going to be a miscommunication, and you're not going to be on the same page. And going into any business relationship, that is one of the most important keys to a successful relationship.
Yeah. And I think the whole point of this exercise is for you to really look at it on the spectrum and say, am I willing to negotiate on these specific, negotiables, non-negotiables, or are they a hard red line for me? Like for myself, honesty, respect, and transparency, so those core values, they're non-negotiable. If it's somebody who doesn't value honesty or respect, it's not worth it for me, because I know that those relationships are going to be very, very hard to kind of maintain through the future because those core values don't align. So really look at it and say, okay, is this something that I'm going to draw the line on? Am I going to hold firm when it comes to this specific topic? As we go down the list, I really want you to think about each and every one and say, where do I stand? And some of them are definitely a spectrum. Some of it's like, I strongly agree that this is where I want to hold my line, but there is a little bit of wiggle room. So that's why it gives you the ability to really choose where you want to stand on it.
And some of you have probably experienced this at work. I mean, if there's companies that you've left, there's reasons that you've left those companies and you're no longer working there. And usually because there's a differentiation between how they're operating and what your core values are. I know for myself, I've left a lot of jobs where the companies I was working for, I didn't feel they were being honest, right? And those were things that were very strongly incorporated into myself of saying, hey, I need to work with a clear mind or a clean mind. And if anyone's disrupting that, then it's not really a place that I want to be. And so, for me to experience that, I'm sure, others have as well. And I know people all around the world have experienced that. There's certain values that are really strict with them. Like we had a driver one time where, he followed a certain faith, and we were moving shipments of beef and alcohol, and that didn't match with his values. And so he tried it, but inside of him, he was still feeling this, something didn't feel right. and he's like, sorry, I can't move this type of freight for you guys, and I'm gonna have to go find a job somewhere else. And we said, hey, that's 100% okay. Nothing wrong with the way that this guy's operating. If it doesn't fall in line with his values, then he's not gonna be able to do that job.
And I think just as important as your core values is the fair treatment, not just between you and your client, but the client and their employees. If they're capable of, mistreating their employees or coming at you with, demands that might not fit within your unique selling proposition, your USP, you're putting that unfair treatment of their mindset onto your employees. There, that could be a room for, a non-negotiable, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, like a very good example that I kind of have for personally, like the business that I've built as well, is how do my customers and the shippers and receivers that they deal with, how do they treat our drivers? There have been situations where drivers show up, they're respectful, they're kind, but they get met with disrespect. And for me, if I go back to a customer and say, hey, look, this is happening, if there's action on it, if it's investigated, looked into, and, dealt with, that's something that we can move forward from. But if there is just like a disregard for it and the driver's, his personal treatment is just neglected, then it's something that, maybe it's not the right fit, and you can kind of move on from that relationship, because if it happens once, typically, it kind of sets a standard as you move forward. And you want to make sure that in these relationships, not only are you being treated fairly and your customers being treated fairly, but everybody else who's involved, the shippers, the receivers, the drivers, the border officers, whoever it is, we need to make sure that that standard is maintained throughout the entirety of the transaction. And this leads into number 3, communication. So it's, the question is, do you see clients who maintain open and clear communication channels and address inquiries and concerns? So that's a perfect example. If I go to a customer and say, hey, look, we went to your shipper and they were having this issue. Are we able to have that open communication? And is that important? So you have to assess, do you want to be able to have open and clear communication with your customers? Is that of vital importance for you in building those relationships? Or is it not quite as critical as maybe it is for me or for Dean?
I think that's important to understand as well, that you could fix a lot of issues that do come up if you're able to communicate. The worst thing you can do is probably just run away from it. And because you'll be running away from a lot of things you do in life. But if you learn how to communicate it, and sometimes just talking it out and just asking the right question, solutions are provided, because you're going to realize that other people also want, fair treatment. Other people want to have good communication. Other people want to share in the good values that maybe we share and that are important to us.
And just the word communication, it's two-way street. So just as last lesson we were talking about being consistent in your communications and asking questions and getting positive feedback on maybe things you're doing wrong, there's nothing wrong with raising an issue and having that open line of communication, because there might be something on the other end with your customer that they might not even be aware. And if there is a problem, or if it's brought up once or twice, but then now it's being consistently brought up, it is addressed, and it improves the overall relationship and the environment for everybody involved.
Yeah. And another really good example is if you're approaching your customer with any issues that are happening, let's talk about transportation logistics here. Let's say you have a delay and it's not your fault, it's not the driver's fault, it's just something that happens. Maybe it's weather related, you can't control the weather. Are you able to go to that customer and say, hey, look, because of this XYZ circumstance that's out of our control, it's going to cost us an additional amount for layover for the drivers, just as an example. Are you able to have a conversation with your customer where you can discuss the opportunity of paying for that additional layover? It may be that you don't end up getting what you're looking for, but can you at least have that conversation where both sides of the story are being heard?
Let's get into number 4, which is location. So kind of what we're teaching here in our platform as well is you have the ability to work from home, which is remote. You have the ability to work in your general region, but you also have the ability to work remotely into a different country or other location besides the one that you're already in. So knowing where you're going to be working from, which geographical area you're going to be targeting, that's important too, because you don't want to start going all over the place and start changing too many directions. But just to kind of focus on one area and exhaust that first, and it just makes it easier for yourself.
Yeah, so it's understanding your niche. Like we started out Western Canada-based carrier, moving shipments across Canada and the United States, but all of our shipments either end or begin here in Western Canada. So that's understanding what's your niche. But, the question of where do you stand on negotiable or non-negotiable is, are you willing to make exceptions to that depending on different contract terms, pricing? You have to look at it and say, okay, where do I stand on this? Will I wiggle, or am I just going to work out of this specific area and there's no exceptions to that?
Right. And I think it's also important to talk about the flexibility of change, because if you're doing a long-term work for a consistent customer and there's another need that they need help with, are you willing to be flexible to make that change to accommodate an issue or a pain point that they're having?
Thanks, Dean. And then that takes us into number 5, which is customer acquisition and maintenance costs. And something that we just want people to understand is that when you are trying to build customers, there may be some sort of cost associated with that. And you want to think about that when you're starting your business. Do I have funds allocated towards helping me build a client? What's that client worth to me in the future? And when you look at that future value of that client, you just say, okay, well, hey, am I willing to invest this much time into acquiring this customer? Am I willing to maybe network where they are? If I have to maybe travel to go see them, or maybe attend a trade show where they may be at, how do I get into the vicinity of my customers?
I mean, one thing that we've seen quite frequently is where customers come to us with an idea or a project that they say, this is what we have. Typically, we've already established a relationship, but it's like, this is a project that we're working on. We want you guys to handle it, but it might not be in our scope of business. So there may be things like acquiring equipment or setting up infrastructure. And those are things where you have to take into consideration and say, okay, what is the scope of the deal? Does it make sense for our business or our industry to take on this additional project? And you have to look at it and see, okay, what are the costs associated with it? And are you going to be able to handle those costs that are associated? Which is going to lead us into number 6, which you're going to see as company size and revenue. So this really comes down to your client profile. What kind of customers do you want to go after? You need to decide, are you looking for companies of various sizes, or are you looking specifically for just like the small to medium-sized companies? Or are you looking for those giant corporate accounts that have, millions of dollars in revenue every year? You have to look at that and go, hey, what am I willing to put forward as my approach to sales? Because they are very different. When you're going after like the mom and pop type companies, your approach is going to be a lot different than when you're going after like those big competitors, those big, name brand companies that you see everywhere, like Walmart or Amazon. These are going to be a lot more challenging, but could be a lot more rewarding if you're able to actually get through. But the approach you're going to have is different. So where do you stand in that?
I think it's the mindset too. The larger corporations are going to maybe take a little bit more time and have a little bit more steps involved in that, whereas the medium to small size companies may not be as extraneous on you as some of the larger corporations that you'll be going after. So you can reduce the amount of steps that you're willing to put into acquiring a customer or going after a customer, as well as saying, okay, well, maybe it's individuals. Individuals are usually just one-time transactions, and it's very spontaneous and sporadic.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth with that one, talking about the time, because the bigger the company, usually the longer the time it takes before things get started. So that's, again, another thing as you're doing your investigative work with trying to understand and research that ideal client, you'll know the trends. We talked already about the different types of things you want to look out for, and definitely that's one of them that you got to keep in mind when you want to secure that work, especially if you want to get started right away.
And then the next on the list is number 7, which is service requirements. And this is where you have to decide whether or not you have your set of services that you are going to stick to, or if you're willing to add or remove additional services based on the needs of your customers, because this will decide who you are going to end up working with at the end of the day. You may have a customer that fits perfectly in your client profile, but they want a service that's outside your scope of business. Are you willing to take on the additional resources, learn the skills necessary, put in the extra work, hire people, whatever it is? Are you willing to make adaptations to the way that you're doing your business in order to meet those service requirements?
Yeah. And that's just deciding, am I an all-in-one shop, or is there services that maybe I can't provide, and just understanding that. So even when we look at tech companies like Google, Google has a lot of different capabilities, search engine, the Gmail, and lots of other components, whether it's a calendar. But then do they provide the softwares to operate your business? Do they provide the accounting software? Do they provide the CRM? Which service offerings do they have? They're not doing everything, even though they might be a large corporation like Google. But they can't provide every single service that a client may be looking for.
Yeah, great point. Another one too is contract terms. We were talking about different issues that can make or break a deal, and that's when you need to decide what are your negotiables and non-negotiables when it comes to contract terms. Your duration, the amount, termination clause. So much goes into that, and it could really lay the foundation for a successful relationship. Sometimes they might just want to try you, and you want to get that commitment. So again, that's something you really need to take into consideration when you're presented the contract or the opportunity absent the contract and trying to get to that commitment.
Yeah, and you kind of have to think this one out thoroughly. Like, is the market going to change? Coming off of things like COVID, where sometimes you have supply chain disruptions and the rates are fluctuating a lot up and down. Do you want to go into it in a peak market state and do a long-term contract, or do you want to wait till the market settles? But it's so unpredictable sometimes, so you really want to be careful about how long of a contract you want to be in and think it through.
Exactly. And then that leads us into number 9, which is safety and compliance. So the question here is, are you going to prioritize customers who prioritize safety and compliance as well? I have a really good example for this one here, and it's, if you're dealing with a customer who is going to put one of our drivers into an unsafe work environment, put them in a situation that they feel unsafe, that might be something where you just say, no, you're putting our drivers at risk. If that's the type of business relationship we're going to have, maybe it's not a good fit, because of course you have to value safety over everything. But there could be situations where it's like a shipper just doesn't want you to wear steel-toed boots. That's something you could potentially compromise on. If it's not a high hazardous area, that might not be an issue having something like that.
And I was speaking to somebody just on the weekend, and he was telling me he's an electrical engineer. He's going out to different job sites in northern British Columbia, and he was telling me that sometimes his employer is making him drive like 400 kilometers in a day from site to site, and and they were really rushing him when he was going out and trying to do these projects, safety checks. And so when they are rushing him, he ended up driving back, and it was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and he had to follow one of their other service vehicles to get back down because there was no GPS. He didn't have GPS available to him in this northern site. And so he's sitting there, and he's in a Ford Explorer, and the service truck, which has all the supplies, is really weighed down and heavy. So they're going a little bit faster, and it's 5 o'clock and it's winter time, and the roads are starting to get icy. And so he starts driving behind him, and he's trying to catch up, and hits a patch of black ice, and he flipped his car 2 times. And lucky to be alive. And he's like, even the people that were in front of me didn't call me for 4 days to find out where it was. And he's like, luckily somebody stopped. But he's and the issue now is like, well, I'm really evaluating the employer that I'm working for, right? Because if they're going to push me where it's unsafe, and they're taking on these projects that are unsafe projects to take on just because they're trying to provide a cheaper price to be competitive, and they're trying to force them to do all these different projects, that's exactly what we're talking about here is how's that safety and compliance record for that company that I want to work with? How are they in treating their vendors? And same thing. You want to be careful when you're even working for a company like that. Your life is not worth it.
And that's why it's so important to do the research, looking through checking out and understanding your ideal client.
Yeah, we actually unfortunately see it all the time in our industry of shippers who don't understand, what our drivers have to go through, and they, push for example, on-time deliveries. That truck needs to be here at 12 o'clock today. But, feasibly, when you're looking at hours of service and how much driver can legally drive in order to be safe, it's not doable. And so that comes back to like that communication aspect. can you have that communication with your customer and say, look, this is why the driver is not going to make it for that appointment, because of the hours of service, they will not be able to legally and under compliance drive throughout the night or whatever it is in order to make that appointment time because there's only a single driver or whatever it is. You have to understand that there are going to be limitations. And then if you can have that open communication with your customer and they're okay with that, and you can explain to them the reasons for it, then that might be something that you can work with. But if they are completely, nope, it needs to be here by 12 o'clock and don't, dismissive of the reasons as to why that's not possible, maybe it's not a good fit.
I think another important topic to take into consideration too, similar to contract terms, are payment terms. And what are you comfortable with in agreeing to, and what are you not? And then, that's really going to set, again, the foundation for that positive relationship and opportunity for growth. Are you comfortable with doing a 30-day or a 45-day, or can you go as far out as 60? And again, it's finding out what their needs are, and are you able to accommodate? And if so, are you comfortable in the accommodation?
I think it's also taking a look at your resources. Do you have the financial capability or capacity to be able to handle something that you're not going to get paid for 60 days out, 90 days out? What's your sustainability? How long can you sustain yourself? It's the same thing of saying, how long can you last without a paycheck? And how comfortable are you not getting paid for this amount of time? And so taking that into accountability needs to, again, it incorporates into your pricing structure. It incorporates into, okay, where do I access these funds from? You're starting to take a look at it, a lot of different aspects to answer these questions.
Yeah, and it's really important. There are a lot of larger customers that they want those 90-day payment terms. For their standpoint, having the ability to pay after 90 days is really good for their business. But is it feasible for you, as whether you're working independently or through a company? Do you have the resources to operate trucks, to pay drivers, to pay salaries, to do the overhead expenses because 90 days is 3 months. Can you do that for 3 months without getting $1 in your account? So those are really things that you need to look at. Maybe a startup company doesn't have the capital in order to do that. Maybe somebody who's been around for 50 years, they do. So you have to really assess it and see where you are in regards to negotiation there. And I think we skipped over number 10 here, but that was pricing. So I want to circle back up to that one here because this one is really, really important. And it's the question of, are you willing to negotiate your pricing based off of different terms, things like volume, frequency, commitment. And this is something that we see quite often here. There can be, situations where you're working off of spot market rates. So if somebody calls me and says, hey, I need to move a truck from California to Vancouver today, I'm going to go based off of market rates. But if that conversation is, hey, I'm going to move 5 loads a week for the next year, and I want you guys to do it, that price could be considerably different because you're looking at it in the longer term and the bigger picture. So those are things you have to look at and say, okay, am I going to be working on like a spot by spot basis, or am I looking at, quoting year round and doing it on the contractual basis?
I'm sure we'll have sections later on to get specific into pricing because pricing does become such a big component of what we do.
Definitely. And then that leads us into the last one here, which is number 12, additional support. This one I think is really, really important because there are customers that are going to ask for additional support from you as their sales representative, as the person that they've initially made contact with. It could be things from, doing additional training, whether that's to integrate with some of their technologies, anything like that. It could be having a dedicated customer service or account representative. These are things that a lot of, especially larger companies, may ask specifically for. And it depends, where you're at. Are you working as like a one-man show, or do you have an operations team to back you up on that? Is where you're going to be able to use to decide where you stand on the spectrum here.
It's so interesting you brought up customer service representative too, because especially if you're new to sales and if you're going to approach it from an entrepreneurial point of view, and you are a one-man or one-woman show. Are you prepared to make the sacrifices? Because a lot of the bigger customers out there might want a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week point of contact. So are you prepared to be a dedicated customer service representative on top of the sales rep? Because they're going to want to be able to pick up the phone. Because if you're doing something, especially in logistics, that is longer distances where the shipment is in transit for 2, 3, 4 days. That customer might want to know where it is at 10:30 at night on a Friday and you have plans, are you prepared to make the sacrifice? And that's when you get into your non-negotiables. Is this something I'm comfortable of doing, or is this a hard no?
And that doesn't necessarily have to be you specifically. Some of that sacrifice could be, am I willing to sacrifice some of the profit that I'm going to make off of this customer to hire a dedicated customer service rep, or to integrate new technologies, or to update systems? So sometimes it's actually more of a financial obligation or sacrifice that you have to decide whether or not you're willing to commit to. So really think about, all of those aspects when it comes to where you stand on your negotiables and non-negotiables. And that kind of leads us to the end here of the specific kind of topics that we wanted to cover. There are probably a couple dozen more that you could think of for yourself. So I challenge you to really go through and decide, are there any other things that are very specific to your business or the industry that you're working in that you can't waver on, or that you can? So really look into that and find out where you stand.
Now that you've taken some time to review your negotiables and non-negotiables, I think the real important part here is to understand, okay, what am I capable of doing now? What are my expectation levels of my clients? If I have a lot of expectations, what do I expect from myself? So I have a quote here that I came up with, and it says, you can't expect the best if you're not willing to become the best. And what we notice a lot in the training that we do is that people want to come in and they have all these high aspirations. I want to grab the biggest client, and I'm going to be doing, X amount of dollar revenue. And when it comes down to doing the workload, they weren't mentally prepared for it. And so people start breaking down as soon as it comes down to like, okay, well, hold on. Like, I thought I was just going to get everything, but now it's like, I actually have to do something to get it. Then, a lot of people are willing to receive, but they're not willing to do. And so I'm hoping what this worksheet does is allow you to really get a grasp of okay, if my expectations are up here, now can I come up and match it? And if not, redo the worksheet. But if it does match, and this is what we talk about a lot in sales and training, is like the law of vibration. We're going to have to match what we're looking to get. You can get something, but it may only last short term if we're not at the right vibration. And going through some of the negotiables and non-negotiables, you're going to be able to kind of see, okay, where am I at these levels? How important are these levels for me, and how important are they for my client? And so if they match, you're going to actually be able to build long-term relationships. And that's what we want for you. And again, set you up for that success. So just understanding yourself a little bit better through this worksheet is what we really want for you to build those long-term relationships.
Yeah. And now that you're taking the time to watch these episodes and hone your skills, what are you prepared to do for yourself? And what kind of effort are you prepared to put forward? Because the harder the effort, the greater the reward.
And what we're really noticing with the younger generation is like, it's not even your fault, because nowadays everything is made to be like super easy. Whether it's Netflix or social media, everything's about getting instant results, getting things instantly in your house. But then it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of effort that goes in on the background to do that for you. Now you get to become that person in the background, right? Doing the sales work, doing the logistics, planning things out, trying to acquire customers, trying to do those acquisitions. But when you're getting into those type of roles and responsibilities, there's going to be a little bit of work there, right? It's not going to come in that easy. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it.
Yeah, and I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that you really do need to have to set out some clear expectations for yourself and for your customer, because that clarity is what's going to be your light at the end of the tunnel. Because sales is hard work. You're going to have to put in the effort. You're going to have to raise your vibration in order to meet, the expectation that you have out of your sales career. But there is that light at the end of the tunnel. That hard work always pays off, but you have to do the hard work. And so hopefully this worksheet will help you kind of lay out your expectations, give you that clarity so that you have a direction to head in.
And we've used this word quite a bit, and it's consistency and hard work. And I think it's important when you're doing this and you're putting in this effort, you want to do that second effort and the third effort, because you want to separate yourself from everybody else. And that's going to have you become successful in the world of sales. And remember, we're here to help you. We can't wait to hear from you. And we're looking forward to the next episode as we continue to grow this together. And until then, enjoy your week, and we will see you soon.
Peace out.
Thanks for having us.